Hey, welcome back to another episode of A Warrior Spirit, where we let the inner warrior shine in their light. Today I have Jessy Marsh. Jessy is a wife, mother. She's also an entrepreneur, has a business, and she's also part of the Encourage and Empower Her movement, which is near and dear to her heart and advocacy for women. So, Jessy, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Jesse, you and I kind of got connected online through a mutual community that we're a part of. So I've kind of fringe got to see your story and grow. But I know that like many of us, you had sunshine and rainbows and a unicorn childhood, right?
No. I wish that I could say that were the case, but
Right.
that was not the case for me.
Where did you grow up?
Oh, all right. So I was born in Washington State, actually. Um, and my mom's family was here in Delaware. So I don't know exactly like what age, but um we had moved back to this side of the country, and when I was about 4, my dad actually kidnapped us. So I was
Wow.
in Washington and or surrounding areas until I was about 10, and then I grew up in Delaware from 10 to 19.
So that in and of itself is a
I'm sorry,
unusual
there's like a hair on my face.
that in and of itself is kind of an unusual situation. So being
Yeah.
quote unquote kidnapped by one family member, did that mean a lot of moving around, a lot of secrecy with, not getting to know friends and associated? Like what was that like as a young child?
So, I mean, at the time, I didn't know any different. And like at one point, we were actually told, um, several different stories about my mom and the situation. So we didn't know that we had been kidnapped. It was my dad. So my dad and his stepdad, had come and picked us up. I'm assuming that's what I thought because I don't really
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And then, as we got older, I had started asking questions, and my dad was not capable of raising children. And had told us several times, like, he wanted my brother. He didn't want me and my sister, but I'm the oldest, and then my sister, and then my brother. So I've always been like the protector to my siblings. And so in order to get to him, I guess he had to take all of us because,
Mhm.
there I was, stubborn and hard-headed. No idea where I get that from or where my daughter gets it from either.
Right.
But so in doing so, he moved us back over there, and we did end up in several places. Um, Mostly just because he was addicted to drugs. He was using the people around him. Like I remember one point we were staying with my aunt, and he had robbed a 7-Eleven, and so she kicked us out.
Wow.
Um, and as an adult and as a parent, like I don't understand that part because it's not like we as children did anything, but I understand her not letting him stay there anymore.
Mhm.
And so from there, we actually ended up, I think at that time we ended up living with his parents, which was not any better. And I think we went to school there for a while, like, and it's really hard just because like he was in and out of jail. So there were times where he would just be missing. And we were like, oh, well, we live with Grandma Mary and, John, I think his name was John. I think we called him Pup Up or something. I don't know. Um, But then, my dad popped back up one day and he was supposedly getting his life together. And we moved into a townhouse. And then he just would disappear for a couple days. And at that point, I had just figured out how to survive and how to keep my brother and sister alive. So it
Mhm.
was more so I would get them to and from school. Did not necessarily mean that I would go. So I don't have any recollection of friends at all from that point of my life. But like I remember, bits and pieces. And like at one point, somebody at the school had called and said they saw me walking my brother and sister to school. Um, and that I did not go. And so they called the authorities, they showed up. So I think that day, like I saw them at the apartment. And so I hid in the neighbors, their kids' treehouse out back. Um, and so I think that actually prompted my mom still lived here in Delaware and had hired, actually, I think it was my stepdad had hired like a private investigator or something. And so all those red flags started throwing alerts that they then petitioned with the court. And that's how my mom ended up finding us. Um, and I say I know that because there was one time I went to school, and that was the day my mom showed up to get us.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and so by then I had been told that my mom was dead. Um,
Wow.
so it's crazy because I walked in and, you know, I already didn't know really what I was doing, but I think like at one point, you know, food and heat and shelter, all of those things were provided at the school. And so in my mind, we didn't have that. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go. Um, and then you walk in and I just remember there being like an exceptionally high amount of cops for the school. And I was like, what's going on? And I wasn't naive to the fact that my dad was always in trouble. So right away I was like, oh God, like what happened? Did he die? Did something happen? And so I started to kind of like look around, and then I saw my sister being escorted by one of the cops. And so I ran out of line and got her. And, you know, I think at the time I was like 8 or 9, and I'm like, don't touch her. Don't. And they're like, it's okay. You're going to come with us too. And I was like, no, we're not. So I like put up a fight, and then in comes a lady, and I'm like, she looks a lot like me. Um, like creepy. And it ended up being my mom's sister. Um, and my mom was traveling, like, I think at that time somebody had picked her up from the airport. Like she was physically on her way. So I remember going in the library, and they're like, they bring my brother in, and my brother came and sat on my lap. And this lady sitting across from me, who we had obviously never seen, was like, I'm your aunt, and your mom's on your way here. And I'm like, no, she's not. She's dead. And everybody's faces in the room were like, what? And I was like, she's not coming. She didn't want us. She left us with Tim, you know, and then she made bad choices, because these were all the things I was told as a kid. And
Yeah.
so my aunt is like, Jessy, that's not, and she called me Jessica, I think, but she's like, Jessica, that's not what happened. And I'm like, of course it is. That's what we've been told, like, forever. And then
Mhm.
it felt like forever, but it might have not been that long. But in walks another lady that looks just like me. And instantly, my brother, who, when my dad kidnapped us, was a baby, there's no
Right.
way that he would have like remembered her.
Hmm.
I just remember him jumping up out of my lap, and he was like, Mom, and like went running to her. And I was just like, ew, no, get like, and it was such a weird feeling for me because I had spent my entire life taking care of them. And I was just like, you don't even know her. Like, wait. And then, you know, obviously there's no denying that we look just alike. So there's that. And then, you know, they started telling us, because I had questions. And
Sure.
later in life, that proved to be a problem too. But I wasn't gonna just take like, I'm your mom. I'm like, where have you been? What have you been doing? And that's where she explained, like, you know, she had drained her savings account trying to find us. She knew like where about his parents lived. Um, but of course they blocked her. They made it impossible to get in contact with Tim. Like, so all of these years had passed and she had tried. And then my stepdad had stepped in and was like, let's find them. Like, I don't know if something had happened like in the court, or like something prompted them to know kind of where we were. And then that's when they were able to find us. So it was like, from there we stayed with my aunt, who lived probably like an hour or two away from where we had been living. And it was probably another like month or two worth of court hearings before we were allowed to leave to come back to Delaware.
So, obviously a massive confusing time for a child. Um, and now from an adult's eyes, you've said that, your dad wasn't equipped to raise kids. So why kidnap, and what was the justification in that dynamic between him and your mom that said it's okay for me to take these kids away from her? Like, why not just take your brother?
So I think he wasn't, I think I was probably the reason that he couldn't just take TJ. And I say that just because I know me. And if we were, sitting there together, I was probably like, no, because, you know, my dad wasn't a good person. And so I don't know. I know there was abuse. There was physical abuse, emotional abuse. I mean, he had addiction problems. So like their ending of the relationship was not like a smooth, easy co-parenting situation. It was very much like, you're not healthy, you can't be around the kids. And my mom had custody of us. So I think it was just his way of getting back at my mom. And
Mm,
then, obviously he had a son and he wanted his son and he wanted to be in TJ's life. And, you know, in doing so, I think he also maybe thought that if he had us, people would help him more.
mm,
Um, but I don't really know, and I'll never really get the answers because I found him about 9 years, 10 years ago. Oh man, me and my husband have been together for 9 years, so probably 11 years ago. And he died conveniently 2 days before we were supposed to talk.
oh wow.
Um, we were supposed to talk the week before, and my aunt was the one I had found, and she's the one I had contact with, and he was homeless, living under a bridge. But he was supposed to come around for the 4th of July. And so that's how she was gonna like connect us. And she had told me the week before, like he called and he was gonna come over, but then he never showed up. Um, and then on the 4th of July, I got a phone call that he was in the hospital and he was dying. And as like a last slap in the face, I was listed as his next of kin.
Oh
And
wow.
his sister was like, they want you to make the choice. They want you, like, he's pretty much brain dead, but they want, and I was like, hard pass. Nope. I will not be. I will not. No, there has to be somebody else. Like, I'm not, I'm not going to make that decision. Like, I know how I would want it to be treated. And I know like the people that are important to me, like my grandmother's wishes will be respected because I love her and I know her and I know what she wants. I don't know this man. I hadn't seen him, heard from him. The last time I heard from him was when I think it was 2 years after we had two birthdays. So I think I was 11 and he sent me a happy ninth birthday card
Ah,
and it was like months late. So I was just like, and it was from prison. It came from the prison that he was in. And I was just like, maybe he tried. Like, I don't know. Maybe drugs caused him to lose a couple years, like whatever. But that was the last interaction I had with him. And then this phone call. And I was like, I will not do it. Um, and then at that same time, the reason that I had found him, I had thought about it previously and I thought about looking into it and reaching out, but I personally didn't have a desire to reach out to him. But my brother did.
mm-hmm,
And it was weird the pedestal that my brother held him on. Um, and I can't like negate his feelings or justify them like either way. But what I was afraid of is my brother finding him and him still being in the place he was basically. I did
mm-hmm,
not want my brother to find him and be so set on like saving him that he put himself in a bad situation because my brother also has, traits of a very addictive personality and, will throw himself into something 100% and forget about all other things. And I knew how important this was to him and I knew that's what would happen. Um, But in the way that things happen, it kind of backfired because I had not told my brother that I found him.
Mm.
Um, and obviously, like up until then, like me and my siblings were very close. I didn't even live in Delaware anymore, but I came home when my sister had her baby. I was there for like her 6 month birthday, her first birthday. Like they were all very important things to me because they were my siblings. And so at that point, I genuinely thought I was protecting him. Um, and I mean, he forgave me, but he was super angry with me. And he was
Sure.
like, but I would have went there. And I was like, I know, that was the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I waited for him to come around to speak and he blew me off, TJ. Like, and I think deep down he knew too, because he was like, yeah, but if it were me, he would have been there. And I was like, yeah. And because of that, he didn't deserve to jump in. Like, I know, I'm aware. Thank you so much for making it very clear that I was not what he wanted.
Yeah.
Um, but you being alive and healthy is more important to me. And so, after he died, he was like, I want to go. I want to go to the funeral. I want to go out there. And I was just like, no, no, you cannot go. Like, and I mean, at this point, my brother's grown. He was in his 20s. Like, I couldn't stop him even if I wanted to. So then he was like, well, come with me. And I was like, no, thank you. I do not, that does not sound fun. And he was just like, well, I'm going. And my grandmother called me and was like, hey, your brother asked to borrow, he needed a couple extra $100 to like buy the ticket and hotel room. And I was like, oh no, that means he's not going to have money if something comes up. Like, and the mama bear in me was like, okay. So I called my brother and I was like, I will go with you, but you're staying with me and we are not staying any longer. We were buying tickets the same day because I lived in Kansas at the time. No, I lived in Florida. I lived in Florida, but he still lived here in Delaware. So I was like, obviously, we're not flying together, but you are leaving the same time I leave or earlier because I wanted to ensure that he got on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he was like, that's fine. I agree. I like at this point, he was doing good in his life. And so he had things to come back to, which is really important. Um,
Yeah.
excuse me, because I was afraid that if he went out there, he would not come back. Um, and so we went out, and my sister did not come. And my sister was adamant she didn't want them to know anything about her. She had just had my niece, and so she was like, I don't want them to know about her. I don't want them. And I was like, I respect it. I am completely capable of being in Switzerland. I'm not going because I'm like looking to form relationships. I'm looking to go to protect TJ. And she was like, I get that. Um, so we went, and it was the most uncomfortable 5 days. But some good came from it. I found out in like the waiting period between finding out he was dead and when we actually went out, that we had a half brother,
Mm.
and which was probably also part of the reason why he stopped chasing us, was because he got that other son he wanted. And if we're being completely honest, my brother facial features is a spitting image of my dad, but Chase has all of his features in like other ways. And so he had the darker hair, the darker skin. Me and my brother are very pale, very my hair is naturally dirty blonde. I know it's very dark right now, but we're both light skin, light hair, light eyes, and my sister was that beautiful olive complexion, dark brown hair, but he didn't want that in her. So he got that the second time around. Um, but that Chase's mom had a good head on her shoulders, and when she started to realize he was not telling the truth about things, like um also went back to drugs at one point. She left too. So Chase, unfortunately, didn't even know that Tim was his dad.
Mm.
Um, and so obviously she came clean about it. She told him, and he had been raised by a phenomenal guy. He's still raising him. I mean, he's grown now, but Tony's phenomenal. He is, we met all of them. Well, we didn't meet Tony. We met Chase and his mom. But we're all friends on social media now. Like I keep up with him as much as possible. So that was some good that came from it. But we were there and they were like, your dad loved you, your dad did this, your dad did, and I am not the person to just like bite my tongue just because he was dead. And so it didn't go well for me and most of the family because I was like, but did he? Because he made a lot of crummy choices and he was the adult. He was the
Mhm.
parent. And even though I'm an adult now, like there's no way I would not have found my children.
Mhm.
Like there's just no like, and he had a P.O. box address for my mom. So it's not like he had our address, but like I would have reached out. I would have done something. And I learned now, like as an adult, I can't put those expectations on other people. So it's
Mhm.
really hard to explain, the rest of the interactions I had were fine, but my aunts and uncles were a hot mess. One of them is a walking poster for why we don't do drugs. Um, Still to this day. And then the other one, there was another brother, and God love him. His name is Johnny. And when I met him the week of the funeral, he was homeless, on drugs. His girlfriend at the time was pregnant. They had just found out recently. And I don't remember the exact conversation, but him and I talked, and he like expressed like sorrow for not having known us and like being there. And I was just like, dude, you're not even doing what you should do for your pregnant girlfriend. Like you guys are making really bad choices. I'm fine. My life is phenomenal compared to yours. Like, please don't apologize. But like maybe get your stuff together.
Mhm.
And I probably used more sour words. Um, and I remember like a couple months later, he added me on Facebook and he was like, hey, I just want you to know while you were kind of harsh, I took everything you said and we've been clean since the day after. And I now have a job and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so I make it a point for the ones that I genuinely feel like had potential and wanted to do better. I've kept contact with them. Um, Everyone else, I decided right then and there, I understood why my mom didn't want us to be around them. She never talked about it. She still to this day, we just don't talk about things. And by
Mhm.
we, I mean that is how things were handled.
Mhm.
Which also then proves to be an issue for me because I want to know. I wanted to know. This is all I needed to know. So I left there, and at the time, me and my sister, when I went, we were fine. My brother got a little drunk and shared about my niece, which then caused
Mhm.
issues with my sister. It was a whole thing. Um, Found out that I wasn't the one that did it, but we still did not talk for a couple years. And I was just like, I don't, I just don't have it in me. Like I didn't even want to go to the stinking funeral. Like I went because of TJ and now it's a whole thing. So fast forward, my brother is still here. He is doing great. Well, he's doing good. Me and my sister still do not talk. Um,
Um,
Me and my mom, we butt heads. We are a lot alike in a lot of ways, and then very different in other ways. Um,
can I interject for a
well,
minute?
yeah,
Um, I um, I know that when you're a strong-willed firstborn and you've had to, and I'm speaking from my own life as well, when you had to protect and raise your sibling or siblings, and then you're brought back into a situation where your role is now to go back to being a child, that is not the easiest of transitions. And it does tend to linger into our adulthood, even if we've accepted our new role and modified a little bit to fit in that new role, it still lingers into adulthood. Um, because of that role we had to assume as children. Was the transition back into being a child when you went to live with your mom um very hard? Like what was it like for you?
It was definitely hard. And I think it was hard in ways that people that haven't been through something probably don't understand. Um, and then there were a couple extra layers like added to that because my biological dad's family was super racist. Um, like I got beat for walking home with a black kid, and it wasn't, that I like picked one kid out of the crowd and walked home. Our bus stop was at the same place, and his house was literally the next house past our driveway. So, it was so there's that. And then, here comes my mom. We're there. I meet my uncle, my aunt. There's so many people that I'm like, oh my gosh, like who argue. And then I also have the issue of like, I don't trust anybody. So I'm just like, what do you want? Why do you want us? What are you doing? Because this whole time we've never really had an adult that wanted us,
Hmm.
and then when we ended up, there were times we were in foster care or like an orphanage overnight or for 2 days waiting for somebody to claim us. And bad things happen there too. So I just did not trust anyone. And then we fly in to, and I can't remember if it was Philly or Baltimore, but wherever it was on this side. And my mom had like, told us about Rob and we had talked to him. And I am not kidding when I tell you it was like a scene out of the movie. He was the only one there waiting, and he was this big black guy. And I was just like, oh, hell, you're trying to get us. Like, this is not a thing. Like, and so that is very much not who I am as a person. My husband is black, our children are mixed. Like, but in those very important transitional moments, I was like stubborn, hard-headed. There's things that I absolutely could have done differently, but I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
So I definitely didn't make it easy on my mom. That's for sure. And then, God love him. My dad, the guy I consider my dad, his name is Rob. Um, but I say all the time, like, I don't know who I would have ended up if it weren't for him. Um, and he is probably the best thing that my mom ever did for us unintentionally, because
Hmm.
obviously they're not together for us, but you know, I I also didn't make it easy for him either though. Like in my mind at that time, like I had a dad, he was a deadbeat and he was terrible, but I had a dad. And I don't know like the role that I'm supposed to play with you, but like I know what dads are and they're not good. My dad did really crappy things to me, and then I had to put myself in situations to protect my siblings. And, so I didn't want another one
Hmm.
first. And then I didn't want one that I didn't trust. And then I also didn't want one that was then going to cause problems because of his skin color. So it was a lot all at once. And then I remember my dad came in and he was like, "Hey, here's a little pamphlet." And it was like a book like this, like, and
Yeah.
it was full of sports. And I was like, what is that? And he was like, I would like you to pick something. Pick something that you might like to try. And I was like, okay. Like, but I gave him a hard time at every turn for probably the first couple years.
Hmm.
And then I found in the catalog, I found sports, and, I had questions. I didn't know what they were. And that was the first time I remember like actually having a connection with either of them. And I went out and I was like, what's softball? And my mom's eyes got this big, and my dad was like, oh my gosh, you'll love it. And I was like, calm down. Don't even know what it is. Like, can you just explain it? And so that next year, or like, the spring, he signed me up to play. And I fell in love with sports. And that's how my whole life changed, like shifted. And, if you ask him, he was like, well, baby, I gave you the pamphlet because you were, I don't know, in fifth grade and you were 113 pounds, 120 pounds. Like you were way overweight. Um, and I just needed to get you active. You already didn't trust me. You didn't like I couldn't come out and say like, "Hey, we need to do something now. Your body doesn't have to be in survival mode. Like we need to get it moving." But that is literally what created the connection with my dad was sports. Um, and then I was naturally really good at softball. And by the next year, I had tried out for a travel team. Um, and my dad God love him, never missed a practice or a game unless he absolutely had to. And I can probably count on one hand how many of those he missed. Um, which says a lot because he was also a Maryland State police officer. Um, and so he was, he worked his way up the ranks. Like my dad is right before he just retired, he was like number 2 in the whole org chart. So, it now as an adult, those things matter more. I definitely took them for granted as a kid. Um, and then my mom that same day, she ended up telling me stories of like her playing sports and, then it led to other questions. And, from then I slowly started to like be more interactive and more, around. And then, my dad loves the Dallas Cowboys.
Hmm.
So we watch football every weekend and I was right there with him, and as hard of a time as I gave him up front, like I am I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I'm 37 years old and we don't even talk on a regular basis. And I would still say I am a full blown daddy's girl. If something happened right now and I couldn't reach my husband, he would be the first person I would call. Um,
Awesome.
which is wild to me because yeah, it makes me a
When
little
did
emotional.
you, that's okay. When did you feel the internal shift from hardened protector to genuinely trusting and loving this new family?
I would say I don't think I ever really fully got there. Um, at least not with my mom. We so my mom's love language is, and it's funny because I didn't realize this until a couple years ago, actually. And it shifted my entire thought process about her, my feelings about her, everything. Um, because I don't think I understood and I didn't give her enough credit. But my mom's love language is absolutely gifts and acts of service. It is not sitting around and talking or communicating about our feelings or um like sharing. She's just not that person. And it took until, we have, so when my husband and I got together, he had 4 daughters already. And so our oldest is now 16, about to be 17. And it took until I got to the point with her where I was like, okay, just giving her an answer isn't working. Like, we need to talk about things. We need to like communicate differently. And also, I was in therapy weekly. Um, and so that helped some too. But, you know, I don't think I ever fully like got to that point. And I don't know if it was necessarily my fault. I don't know that it was anybody's fault, but I still think there was some weird like resentment and I was the mom. So like it was a weird like obviously she's our mom and she's our parent, but like I just don't know that I ever fully like hit that level of trust with her. And then by the time I did, it just I don't know that I ever really did until I was a full-blown adult living on my own. Um, but I think with my dad, we had more to connect on, but I don't think it was ever more than like surface level.
Mm.
Um, and again, I didn't realize that until I was an adult and we went back. Um, my family actually had a house fire in November of 2021. Um, and kind of like I just said, my dad was the first person I called. I was actually on my way to their house that day. And so I called and I was like, I can't come. Like, and I need you there. Kevin just called me. The house is on fire. Like, we have to go. And he was like, do you have the kids? I'm like, well, yeah, I have the littles, but Caden was there with him. Like, I gotta go. And just meet me. And so my dad was the first person there. And he took the kids for us so that I could go to the hospital with Kevin. Um, but then around that time was when we were just starting to like have an adult relationship, because we hadn't talked for years. And we were about a year in to reconnecting and like forming. And then my family of 7 moved into their house that already had 3 adults and 1 child living there. So it was a lot. And it definitely added a lot more stress to both sides. And when we moved out, we kind of just, it died there. Like we just, they came over and saw the new house once, and then it took months, and it wasn't until my daughter was like, she calls them Nana and Papa, and she was like, where are Nana and Papa? Do they not love me? And I was like, okay, nope. This is my fault. And I had to explain to her, like, it has nothing to do with you. And I reached out to them, and, we're at a good place. By good, it's civil, but my husband and I talked about it, and I was like, my mom might not have been the best mom for what I needed, but she's a phenomenal grandparent. And why should my daughter have to miss out on that because I'm too stubborn to admit that I also wasn't an easy kid? Like, so we're in a place now where they see her pretty regularly. We're working on it. But she loves them and they love her, and I don't ever have to worry. And that's where I say, like, now there's a trust there because, like, I trust them with her life. That's my baby. She's my one and only biological kid. Like, nobody gets her, but they have actively taken her, and they took her out of town for a day. Like, so if you ask me if I trust them, I absolutely trust them to take care of my daughter. But I don't think I have given them enough trust or like vulnerability.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's still some healing there that has to be done on both parts. And again,
yeah.
this is from experience in my own life. If one side isn't willing to talk about the things that need to be discussed to bring that healing about, it makes it very difficult. You can forgive all you want, you can love all you want, but it's really hard to heal when you can't get the answers you need or think you need in order to heal. Because I think there's a level of healing that we can do in spite of not having the answers. I think a lot of us choose not to unless we have the answers we're seeking. And if one party just won't go there for their own pain and their own trauma, that makes that connection really, really difficult. But I want to ask you, well, first off, do you agree with that?
I do. I and I feel like that's the response that we've gotten is like she doesn't want to talk about things. And so I'm
Yeah.
now at a place where I'm in a much different headspace about it. And so I have forgiven her, and I have come to the terms of, like, I have to meet her where she's at. And
Right.
so if that means that I don't have a great relationship with my mom, but I have a decent relationship and my daughter has a phenomenal grandmother, I'm okay with that. Um, and I don't fault her for that anymore, which before I think I took everything personal because I was so angry.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm just not angry. I just don't have the energy or the desire to hold that anymore. And so
And our life becomes much uh, more refreshing when we've realized we've let go of that anger. But you, coming from where you were, the childhood that you just described, um, how did that? Because now you're on the other side. Now you're the stepmom trying
yeah,
to interact with girls.
yeah, we have all girls.
How does how does your life experience help you make that transition into full-blown parenthood easier, or has it?
I don't know that it's necessarily made it easier. Um, it has definitely made me appreciate my dad more. And there have even been times where I've been like, 2 of the girls play travel softball. And I've texted my dad, like, Jesus criminy, this is so expensive and exhausting. And I don't know how you did this. And, things I didn't think of as a kid. But it's funny because my dad is actually the one that reminded me of this, but he was like, after he met Kevin and the girls, and he was like, what's funny is you always said you were going to have one kid and then adopt a bunch of kids. You just did it
Mm,
backwards. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Like, and before we had Paxton, we had had a couple miscarriages, and I had pretty much like succumbed to the fact that like I don't think I was meant to have a child. I think that my role was to be here for the girls, because their mom wasn't a good example of a mom. She's not active. Um, and so I took that very seriously. And so I was like, you know what? Again, I don't know where I would have ended up if it hadn't been for Rob. So like if I can be that same person for them, and I can teach them what it means to be strong and able to do things on your own. I mean, I'm very spoiled. I mean, my husband is a very active husband and a very active dad, and I know not everybody has that, but I still wanted them to have higher standards, and so that became very important to me. But there were definitely times where I was like, you know what? It's more frustrating as a stepmom because I watched people praise my dad, like, how sweet of you. These kids didn't have a dad and you stepped in. And, meanwhile, I decided, I liked my now husband, but I liked him enough at the time to be like, okay, I know you have kids. I'm committed enough to making steps forward. Like, I want to be a part of the kid's life too. Like, I made that choice. I knew that they had a mom. I didn't know how bad that situation was at the time, but I made the choice to step up and meet them and love them and treat them like my own. And instead of being met with the same grace that my dad was met with, I was called all kinds of names. I was playing house with somebody else's kids. I was trying to take her place. And I was like, at the time, we had the kids like every other weekend. I was like, calm down. I'm just trying to be the fun one. Like, they're not
mm,
my sole responsibility. Like, I, that is not it at all. And so in some ways, it was actually more frustrating because I had watched one step parent step in and be amazing and get treated amazingly. And then, I was like, oh, people will appreciate this. People, not that I did it for other people, but I was definitely not met with the same amount of grace. And so for
mm,
me, that was a super hard period because I was like, I don't understand. If I stepped in and were like treating them like redheaded stepchildren, would that be acceptable? Like, I don't
mhm.
understand what you guys want.
Yeah.
Like, and it took a long time for me to not let that affect me. Um, and in our situation, the girl's mom was, she did not make it easy either. And let's just put it that way. And so there were times where like, I felt like I needed to defend myself, and I said things that me now would never do or say. But I felt like I needed to defend myself, and I needed to like have a comeback every time something was said. And I think I definitely added to my own stress and my own anxiety and my own everything because I let them bring me out of character, or you know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I don't know, but I mean, it definitely like some sides it helped me, in other ways it threw me backwards because I didn't understand why I was being met with such like nastiness. And then I just realized that unfortunately that's just how things are. If you're a
Hmm.
woman that steps into the role, you're playing house and you're trying to be someone's mom, but if it's a dad, hands down, he becomes the best thing on earth since sliced bread. And I'm like, I just don't get it. It is exactly the same. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's not hard to step into the role of stepdad either, but I don't know. It just, in some ways it helped, and in other ways it did not. It actually set me up for failure.
So is your relationship with your stepdaughters good, bad, indifferent?
Um, I have really good relationships with all of them but one. Um, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. Um, Unfortunately, she's got a lot of mommy issues, to put it like as simple as
Mhm.
possible, that she needs to figure out and work on. And she is also the most like her mom.
Mm.
Um, and we just don't get along. Um, but as far as the other ones go, they live with us all of them but her live with us full time. Um, and we are like this. They are my kids. Like they the older two will call me Jessy, but they like refer to me as their mom to their friends. And
Yeah.
Gabby, the 8-year-old, she's the youngest of the four. She calls me mom. Like when she's sick and she needs somebody to take care of it, it's me. Like
Mhm.
that's my girl. They're just as much my kid as Paxton is. So we are all very close. And we have phenomenal relationships. And unfortunately, we went through a phase, where when my mental health was really bad, I didn't like anybody, including myself.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I've worked very hard over the last like year and a half to fix those relationships. Um, Especially
What
because
tools are you using for yourself, though? What tools are you using to transform? Because any of your exterior relationships won't get better until the relationship with yourself is fixed. So,
correct.
what what tools and what has been your saving grace to help fix those issues within yourself that needed to be healed?
So I think a lot of it I've done in therapy. Um, and then obviously taking the things that we talk about in therapy and actually doing them.
Hmm.
And I say that because there was probably a good 6 months where I would go to therapy and she would say, like, let's do X, Y, and Z. And then I'd go back the next week and she'd be like, did you do it? And I'm like, hell no, I didn't. Um, Sorry. Like, and it finally came to, she was like, listen, I think I see what you're capable of. I see, there's a light there, but like you have to do the work. Um, and it hasn't been easy, but there's definitely been, I went to the Unleash You Now women's retreat. Um, and at that, Dr. Vinny actually gave us, um, like a childhood trauma sheet. And that was the first time that I had ever addressed anything from my childhood. Um, and actually this video was the first time I've ever openly talked about it. So there's definitely been a lot that's happened in the last year and a half that I have put myself in uncomfortable situations to then work through them, because the old me
Hmm.
wouldn't have, I would have never shared about it. I wouldn't have talked about it. Not even in therapy. My therapist was like, every time I ask you a question about this, we shut down. Like that tells me this is a trigger. We need to get through it. And, um, and at other points I was really bad off. I was on, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, um, a mood stabilizer. Some of the things that I was going through, took, I put so much of me into other people that I wasn't taking care of myself. And so, like you said, those relationships were very surface level or like not at all. I had shut down and I didn't really talk to anyone. Um, right before I actually started therapy, my husband, who is genuinely to my core, he's my best friend. But he, one of the days before was like, you have turned into a black hole. I don't know who you are. Like, this just isn't, this isn't you, but something's got to give. And it was, unfortunately, it makes me sad thinking about it. But had he not been honest with me, like, I don't know how long it would have taken before I actually reached out to get into therapy. So, I mean, so there's that. And then I also started, my husband and I met when we were both working out and losing weight, and we had kind of just stopped. So like I've restarted working out. I've started, taking care of my mental health alongside, because at one point I was so focused on my mental health, I wasn't doing anything physical. And then I was like not happy with my body or how I felt. So I've tried very hard to just encompass all of them at healthy levels, not focusing so hard on one and not the other.
Yeah.
Um, and another thing that I have done is um, I took a workshop here locally with Jessica Moyer. And if you don't know who she is phenomenal. She actually wrote a book, and it's about like overcoming, um, pain and sorrow. And she held a women's workshop, and in that, she gave us a guideline to use, that are called the 5 Gs, and I won't go into them because that's her thing. But it has been almost 2 years, and I will still check in with those. Like, have I practiced gratitude today? Have I put 3 good, kind acts of kindness out into the universe? Have I, and sometimes it's just forcing yourself to do the self-reflection that we don't do on a normal basis. Um, that really allows me to kind of check myself. But then I've also put that out there to, my family too. Like, hey, listen, this is the first time I've been 37, raising a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know who thought that I should be in charge of all these little people, but like, I'm learning with you. So like, I know I'm not perfect. And there are times where as the parent, I might get super frustrated and respond a certain way, but I will then go back now. This wasn't a thing before, but I would then go back and be like, okay, listen, this is what triggered me. This is why I got upset, but we need to talk about this. And I feel like before there wasn't that level of trust or comfort. And so I feel like that has been a huge shift in the way that we do things. Um, and also like we have a wide range of ages in our house. So like, they joke about like by the time you have your youngest, like all things are out the window. And man, it is true. It is true because the things I cared about even 3 years ago, I'm just like, is it even worth it at this point? Like, let's focus on making sure she's a decent human being. She uses her
Right.
manners. Like, those things are more important to me than, presenting like our life is perfect. Like
Yeah.
and I'm very real with my family.
Well, I think in order for the healing and the happiness, the mind, body, and soul have to all three be aligned. I look at them as a three-legged stool, and if one is out of alignment, yeah, you can keep the stool still balanced, but it's sure a whole lot harder,
Yeah.
So balancing all three makes that life a whole lot easier to manage. And being raw and real with yourself from, your own traumas and your own part that you played in the life you led, that helps our children, I think, see that you don't have to be perfect. Life isn't some kind of show. You can be raw and real about it, but you can overcome whatever it is that was before you. So I think the fact that you're still um, honest with your family about who you are and the life you've endured or led, makes that next generation see it a little easier and a little better. um, as you move forward into 2024, what is in store for Jesse?
Ooh, so this year, um, my husband and I actually decided that um we had we've kind of shifted. So, we had the fire in 2021, and we finally decided like the middle of last year, we were like, dude, we're tired of just being like in survival mode. Like we're doing good. But now we need to switch our mindset. We need to, reframe the way we think about things. And so this year, we're grinding really hard to get, you know, to where we want to be financially. And so some of that means like sacrificing, like trips and random, adventures that we would go on. So this year we're really focused on just going like back to the fundamentals. So like, you know, this month, and it happened right around my birthday, which was in December. I just decided, I was like, I've got to do something. I got to get back to the gym. I got to start working out. I need to eat better. And so, we normally don't do like New Year's resolutions. But this year I was like, you know what? This is like the perfect time to revamp, restart. So we are really focused on paying off, some of the debts that we acquired after the fire. We are going to the Movement Maker Live in Nashville, with Unleash You Now. Margaret and Dr. Vinny and I started Encourage and Empower Her in September. And so this year, my main focus with that is making sure that women who need support, or even who don't think they do, know that we're here and that we exist. Because more people need a village than I think they realize.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that is, and my family. This year is all about focusing. I had to spend the last year or so really focusing on myself. And so now it's kind of showing them, kind of like reintroducing myself, I guess. Like, you know, if somebody has been short-tempered and easy to piss off over the last couple of years, you kind of have to re-show them like, no, that's really not who I am. Like, I'm sorry that that's who I was for a couple of years, but I was in a really bad place. And so, that is my main focus, is to make sure that they know like who I am and who I want to be to them.
Well,
And
he
then from there,
reintroduces the trust, because
yeah,
if you're always angry, and again, I'm speaking part of my life, but if you're always angry, they don't trust you to be soft. They don't
yeah,
trust you to be loving and caring. So you do have to reintroduce that piece into, the family dynamic.
yeah.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I
No,
can
you're
relate.
fine. But yeah, I mean, that's basically what it is. Like, it's one thing for me to say, like, just trust me. And then, something happens and I do get mad. Like, I'm still the parent. There's going to be expectations and guidelines. But it has definitely become a priority for me to like work through those things. Especially, with the older two, we're going through more with them than we are the 4-year-old. The things that upset the 4-year-old are sometimes ridiculous and easy to work through, versus now we're at crucial points with the older two. The oldest one just started driving. Like, trust needs to be a two-way thing. I need to be able to know that I can trust you to be where you're supposed to be. And I always joke that she's setting us up for failure too, because she is, knock on wood, she's pretty easy. She was like, hey, get life 360. Here you go. Like, I don't have anything. And I was like, it's actually a really good idea. I'm the parent. I probably should have thought of that, but it just works better if I know that I can trust you and I want you to feel the same way. So like, as far as our kids are concerned, that's where we're at is, this year we're focusing really hard on doing or having experiences versus crap. Like, we just finished Christmas, but our birthday in this house starts, there's March, April, June. Like, there's just so many that we're like, you know what, we're this year, let's focus on giving experiences. Let's do more as a family. Because unfortunately, over the last couple of years, we haven't done those. And we want to do it before our kids are so grown they don't want to hang out with us anymore.
Right,
So
exactly. Well, I certainly love having you in my tribe and me being in yours and being in the same orbit. I ask every guest who comes on, what does having or being a warrior spirit mean to Jessy?
um I think the thing that I would say is like, we're capable of doing the hard things. It doesn't mean that every day is going to be rainbows and butterflies, but it doesn't mean that a bad day means you have a bad life. You're capable of doing good and being good and putting good out there, and you don't know how that can affect somebody else.
I like that. Well, I certainly appreciate the time you shared with us, and thank you for trusting some of these stories that you don't talk about to come out, and I'm sure that they're gonna help others, get through their own hardship as well. So I appreciate you and thank you, and send many blessings to you and your family.
Thank you.
Alrighty, have a blessed night.
You too.